Thing with testosterone I've found is that if anything, it makes men less confrontational. That's a big one. And when we look at neurologically how androgens work, they absolutely are disinhibiting. When you're starting TRT, learning how to use insulin syringes and stab yourself and all this kind of stuff can be a bit daunting. So I think twice a week is a good place to start. But if someone is, obese, if someone is compromised cardiovascularly, it may be better to start with even 3 times a week to keep it smoother and have less peaks. The biggest myth I would see is that testosterone makes you ragey, causes roid rage. I think we've all met or seen some roided up dickhead at a nightclub pick a fight with someone, punch someone in the back of the head. I used to be a DJ, I saw that a lot. That's not what testosterone does. Massive doses of anabolic steroids combined with being a dickhead in the first place, absolutely, for sure. And different ones will do that differently based on their different chemistry. But the thing with testosterone I've found is that if anything, it makes men less confrontational. That's a big one. And when we look at neurologically how androgens work, they absolutely are disinhibiting. So I find that testosterone is an amplifier. It makes men more of who they are. So if men are compassionate and empathetic and caring, when they have more energy, when they are less stressed biologically, because testosterone antagonizes a lot of effects of stress, they tend to be more of who they are, but they also tend to be more calm because their body, and as Luke talked about before, stress is this huge factor. And I like to look at stress very simply as not having enough X to do Y, whether don't have enough money to pay my bills, not smart enough to be on this panel, all of these different things. It's, not having enough of what you need to do what you need to do. So when a man is lower testosterone, he tends to be lower energy. He tends to feel a lot worse. And the idea that when we increase his testosterone, that's going to make him violent, aggressive, it's going to give him a bunch of problems. I have found that to actually be the opposite. And one thing that does come up with that, though, in terms of a counter argument, is that I've had a couple of guys, come to me, particularly younger guys. They've never had high testosterone a day in their life. And it's a very different demographic working with men who've never properly androgenized versus men who are in their 40s, 50s, and they're returning back to how they felt at 21, 22, where you've got a guy at 25 and he's been like, well, I felt like shit my whole life. The difference is that he'll come back and say, oh, I can't control my temper anymore. I'm getting a bit of a temper. And it's not that he could control it in the first place. He didn't have a temper to begin with. So he's learning. A lot of these guys, when they're starting testosterone, when they're younger, when they haven't actually had that peak androgen level before, they might have to get to know themselves a little bit better in terms of now they've got a bit of this fire that they have to regulate. But it's definitely far from flying off the handle and becoming difficult to manage or violent or aggressive. And a lot of the time when men come to me and their wife has a concern about them going on testosterone, their girlfriend has a concern about them going on testosterone, it's that they're going to become some kind of toxic masculine dickhead, where in reality it's going to actually make their man more of who he is, and it's going to help him in that way. So that would be the biggest myth that I see.
If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
What I found on average with the guys who I'm working with, just to talk numbers, just to help people, is it would be a range between about, I think the lowest I've seen was about 10 milligrams a day, about 70 milligrams a week, and the highest I've seen was about 300, 350. But those guys were pulling the same numbers. These were people who were hyper responders or hypo responders, just like you can have one guy who has half a cup of coffee and it blows him through the roof, and someone else who has 8 cups of espresso and they barely feel it. So it takes different doses for different guys to get to the same number, and then different numbers will also produce a therapeutic response. But on average, with the clients who I work with, and I have to be careful with how I word this, I recommend generally as a ballpark about 150 a week to start, give or take, depending on things like age, SHBG, their baseline state of health. I think twice a week is a good place to start if we're talking cypionate and enanthate. I think that gives you that sweet spot of not having to inject yourself all the time. I also think that when you're starting TRT, learning how to use insulin syringes and stab yourself and all this kind of stuff can be a bit daunting. So I think twice a week is a good place to start. But if someone is, obese, if someone is compromised cardiovascularly, if someone has other health issues going on, it may be better to start with even 3 times a week to keep it smoother and have less peaks. I think that when it comes to what the optimal dosing protocol for something like cypionate and enanthate would be, it would be daily injections, but it's whether the juice is worth the squeeze from doubling the amount of injections from 3 times a week to daily. I think that the diminishing returns for effort and stabbing yourself kind of sets in at about 2 to 3 times per week, given the individual. And some guys, I find that a really good spot for injection frequency is when do you forget to do your shot? So if it's Monday, Thursday, and it comes around to like Friday morning and you're like, oh shit, I forgot to do my shot on Thursday, that's a good spot for you. But if you're hanging out for that next shot, I think that's a good indicator that you're going, okay, maybe I could increase the frequency. I found that's been a good rule of thumb. And I found that in terms of the number that we need to take free testosterone to, it's somewhere between the top quartile of the reference range and maybe double the top of the reference range, depending on the guy. We can't test for androgen receptor sensitivity, and different ages will respond differently. So if you've got a guy who's healthy, fit, 21, doing everything right, and an 80-year-old, alcoholic who's obese, what is physiological for the young guy and what is physiological for the older guy are going to be two completely different things. So I think that there's a lot of factors that needed to be taken into account. When I worked out the average of all the guys who I work with, I think it was about 160 or 170 a week was the average number. I'm a bit of a low responder, so I use 250 a week, but that's what gets me the numbers of an average guy in about 200, 210. But yeah, it depends on a lot of factors, but I find that those numbers are good ballparks to work with. And I find that if we're tight, I like to start a bit lower and aim for the top of the reference range for starting TRT, giving their body time to adjust and then titrating up gradually. So rather than making a big jump in, let's say, 50, 60, 70 milligram increments, bumping it up by 25 to 30 milligrams, giving it 8 to 12 weeks, up to 16 weeks, checking the blood, see how they feel, and then step it up again, because the body will need time to adjust, because there's a lot of processes that are impacted by androgens, and giving your body a big jump will be more likely to cause things like acne, water retention, and other side effects.
And I think one of the most naive things that bodybuilders do, and if you blast at a level that's dangerous of a cocktail of whatever your bro at the gym told you to take, then you'll offset the damage that you did, which is just not how it works. And if we have a spectrum of, hypergonadal to steroid jacked out of the sky, the level that men should be at, they should be here and they're like here.